benches. An iron gate at the hotel front opened into a passageway with a courtyard at the rear. The walls were whitewashed and set with little ornate colored tiles. The captain's man wore carved boots with tall heels that rang smartly on the tiles and on the stairs ascending from the courtyard to the rooms above. In the courtyard there were green plants growing, and they were freshly watered and steaming. The captain's man strode down the long balcony and rapped sharply at the door at the end. A voice said for them to come in. He sat at a wickerwork desk, writing letters, the captain. They stood attending, the captain's man with his black hat in his hands. The captain wrote on, nor did he look up. Outside, the kid could hear a woman speaking in Spanish. Other than that, there was just the scratching of the captain's pen. When he had done, he laid down the pen and looked up. He looked at his man, and then he looked at the kid, and then he bent his head to read what he'd written. He nodded to himself and dusted the letter with sand from a little onyx box and folded it. Taking a match from a box of them on the desk, he lit it and held it to a stick of sealing wax until a small red medallion had pooled onto the paper. He shook out the match, blew briefly at the paper, and knuckled the seal with his ring. Then he stood the letter between two books on his desk and leaned back in his chair and looked at the kid again. He nodded gravely. "Take seats," he said. They eased themselves into a kind of settle made from some dark wood. The captain's man had a large revolver at his belt, and as he sat, he hitched the belt around so that the piece lay cradled between his thighs. He put his hat over it and leaned back. The kid folded his busted boots one behind the other and sat upright. The captain pushed his chair back and rose and came around to the front of the desk. He stood there for a measured minute, and then he hitched himself up on the desk and sat with his boots dangling. He had gray in his hair and in the sweeping mustaches that he wore, but he wasn't old. "So you're the man," he said. "What man?" said the kid. "What man, sir?" said the captain's man. "How old are you, son?" 19. The captain nodded his head. He was looking the kid over. "What happened to you?" "What?" "Say, sir," said the recruiter. "Sir?" "I said, what happened to you?" The kid looked at the man sitting next to him. He looked down at himself, and he looked at the captain again. "I was fell on by robbers," he said. "Robbers?" said the captain. "Took everything I had. Took my watch and everything." "Have you got a rifle?" "Not no more, I ain't." "Where was it you were robbed?" "I don't know. There wasn't no name to it. It was just a wilderness." "Where were you coming from?" "I was coming from Nacogdoches?" "Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir." "How many were there?" The kid stared at him. "Robbers? How many robbers?" 7 or 8, I reckon. I got busted in the head with a scantling." The captain squinted one eye at him. "Were they Mexicans?" "Some. Mexicans and niggers. There was a white or two with them. They had a bunch of cattle they'd stole. Only thing they left me with was an old piece of knife I had in my boot." The captain nodded. He folded his hands between his knees. "What do you think of the treaty?" he said. The kid looked at the man on the settle next to him. He had his eyes shut. He looked down at his thumbs. "I don't know nothing about it," he said. "I'm afraid that's the case with a lot of Americans," said the captain. "Where are you from, son?" "Tennessee." "You weren't with the volunteers at Monterey, were you?" No, sir. Bravest bunch of men under fire I believe I ever saw. I suppose more men from Tennessee bled and died on the field in northern Mexico than from any other state. Did you know that? No, sir. They were sold out. Fought and died down there in that desert, and then they were sold out by their own country. The kid sat silent. The captain leaned forward. We fought for it. Lost friends and brothers down there, and then, by God, if we didn't give it back. Back to a bunch of barbarians that even the most biased in their favor will admit have no least notion in God's earth of honor or justice or the meaning of republican government. A people so cowardly they've paid tribute 100 years to tribes of naked savages, given up their crops and livestock, mines shut down, whole villages abandoned, while a heathen horde rides over the land looting and killing with total impunity. Not a hand raised against them. What kind of people are these? The Apaches won't even shoot them. Did you know that? They kill them with rocks. The captain shook his head. He seemed made sad by what he had to tell. Did you know that when Colonel Doniphan took Chihuahua City, he inflicted over 1,000 casualties on the enemy and lost only one man, and him all but a suicide? With an army of unpaid irregulars that called him Bill, were half-naked, and had walked to the battlefield from Missouri? No, sir. The captain leaned back and folded his arms. What we are dealing with, he said, is a race of degenerates. A mongrel race, little better than niggers, and maybe no better. There is no government in Mexico. Hell, there's no God in Mexico. Never will be. We are dealing with a people manifestly incapable of governing themselves. And you know what happens with people who cannot govern themselves? That's right. Others come in to govern for them. There are already some 14,000 French colonists in the state of Sonora. They're being given free land to settle. They're being given tools and livestock. Enlightened Mexicans encourage this. Paredes is already calling for secession from the Mexican government. They'd rather be ruled by toad-eaters than thieves and imbeciles. Colonel Carrasco is asking for American intervention, and he's going to get it. Right now, they're forming in Washington a commission to come out here and draw up the boundary lines between our country and Mexico. I don't think there's any question that ultimately Sonora will become a United States territory. Guayama's a U.S. port. Americans will be able to get to California without having to pass through our benighted sister republic, and our citizens will be protected at last from the notorious packs of cutthroats presently infesting the routes which they are obliged to travel. The captain was watching the kid. The kid looked uneasy. Son, said the captain, we are to be the instruments of liberation in a dark and troubled land. That's right. We are to spearhead the drive. We have the tacit support of Governor Burnett of California. He leaned forward and placed his hands on his knees. And we will be the ones who will divide the spoils. There will be a section of land for every man in my company. Fine grassland, some of the finest in the world. A land rich in minerals, in gold and silver, I would say, beyond the wildest speculation. You're young, but I don't misread you. I'm seldom mistaken in a man. I think you mean to make your mark in this world. Am I wrong? No, sir. No. And I don't think you're the sort of chap to abandon a land that Americans fought and died for to a foreign power. And mark my word, unless Americans act, people like you and me who take their country seriously, while those mollycoddles in Washington sit on their hindsides, unless we act, Mexico, and I mean the whole of the country, will one day fly a European flag, Monroe Doctrine or no. The captain's voice had become soft and intense. He tilted his head to one side and regarded the kid with a sort of benevolence. The kid rubbed the palms of his hands on the knees of his filthy jeans. He glanced at the man beside him, but he seemed to be asleep. "What about a saddle?" he said. saddle?
Yes, sir.
You don't have a saddle?
No, sir.
I thought you had a horse.
A mule.
I see.
I got an old hull on the mule, but there ain't much left of it. Ain't a whole lot left of the mule. He said I was to get a horse and a rifle.
Sergeant Trammell did? I never promised him no saddle, said the sergeant. We'll get you a saddle. I did tell him we might find him some clothes, Captain. Right. We may be irregulars, but we don't want to look like bobtails, do we?
No, sir. We ain't got no more broke horses, neither, said the sergeant.
Well, break one.
That old boy that was so good about breaking them is out of commission.
I know that. Get somebody else.
Yes, sir. Maybe this man can break horses. You ever break horses? No, sir. Ain't no need to sir me. Yes, sir.
Sergeant, said the captain, easing himself down from the desk.
Yes, sir?
Sign this man up.